I should have known it was going to be a disaster the moment Fiona brought up the cat. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, and we were reorganizing the storage closet. One of those mutually dreaded chores we'd put off for so long. It felt more myth than task. Boxes of junk were piled everywhere, and the air smelled like stale cardboard. Fiona sat cross-legged on the floor, holding up a ceramic cat figurine I hadn't seen in years. "Do we really need to keep this?" she asked, turning it over like a crime scene artifact. I froze. That's not just a ceramic cat. That's Nibbles. Her face was blank. Who's Nibbles? Who's Nibbles? I repeated, scandalized. Nibbles was my childhood cat. That's a memorial figurine. My mom gave it to me after he, passed. Oh my God, she gasped, clutching the cat to her chest in mock horror. I almost threw away your cat's grave marker. How heartless of me. I gave her a sharp look. It's not funny. That cat was my best friend for a decade. She rolled her eyes. Relax, I'm not tossing it. But it's not exactly your vibe anymore, is it? What's wrong with my vibe? It's less nostalgic pet lover and more I write manifestos in coffee shops. Wow. I crossed my arms. Thank you for that unsolicited psychoanalysis. She grinned, clearly enjoying herself. All I'm saying is, maybe we don't need to keep everything. Now, Fiona's minimalism is one of the things I love about her. Or did love, until it started to clash with my sentimental hoarder tendencies. She's one of those people who lives by the one in, one out rule, and could fit her entire wardrobe into a carry-on suitcase. Meanwhile, I formed deep emotional bonds with mugs, t-shirts, and, apparently, ceramic cats. I decided to stand my ground. Nibbles stays. Non-negotiable. Fine, she said, setting it aside. But if Nibbles stays, we need to have a serious conversation about this. She reached into another box and pulled out the hideous, lumpy clay bowl I'd made in middle school art class. That's a memory, I said, snatching it from her hands. That's an eyesore, she countered. Are we building a shrine to your awkward childhood? Or can we agree to let some things go? We went back and forth like that for over an hour, each item a new battle. Fiona suggested donating my collection of snow globes, arguing that they were dust magnets. I retaliated by pointing out her 4 nearly identical white sweaters, which I deemed excessive. By the time we reached the final box, we were barely speaking. And that's when it happened. At the bottom of the box was an old video game console, an ancient, yellowing relic I hadn't touched in years. I lifted it like an archaeologist discovering a long-lost artifact. The N64. Do we need an N64? Fiona asked, already rubbing her temples. Of course we need it. This is history. History that's collecting dust. Do you even have the cords for that thing? No, but I could find them. When? In 10 years? At this point, it's just junk. It's not junk, I said, more forcefully than I intended. It's my childhood. She raised an eyebrow. Your childhood is taking up an entire closet. We're adults, Alex. We don't need to keep relics of the past to feel like we existed. That struck a nerve. Maybe you don't. You don't seem to care about anything sentimental at all. Oh, here we go. She threw up her hands. Just because I'm not emotionally attached to every random object doesn't mean I don't care. I just don't need to hoard garbage to prove it. Garbage? I felt a sharp, indignant heat rise in my chest. You're calling my stuff garbage now? Not all of it, she said, clearly trying to backpedal. But come on, Alex. An N64? It's dead tech. It's not dead tech. It's a classic. Classic garbage, she muttered under her breath. I don't know what came over me, but I snapped. Oh, I'm sorry. Should I just throw out everything that doesn't fit your perfectly curated, beige, aesthetic life? God forbid something doesn't match your Instagram feed. Her mouth dropped open. Wow, you're really going to make this personal? Maybe I am. Because you're acting like I'm some kind of lunatic for wanting to keep things that matter to me. And you're acting like I'm some joyless minimalist robot who hates fun. Well, I started, but then I caught myself. The line between frustration and outright cruelty was a thin one, and I was teetering on the edge. We both stood there, glaring at each other, surrounded by the mess we'd pulled from the closet. The silence was heavy, like the aftermath of a storm. Finally, she crossed her arms. "You know what? Keep the stupid N64. Keep all of it. I don't care." "Fine. Fine." She stormed out of the room, and I dropped onto the floor, fuming. For a moment, I considered throwing the console out of sheer spite. But then I looked at it, really looked at it, and remembered the hours I'd spent playing Mario Kart with my little brother, the sound of our laughter echoing through the house. The anger melted into something softer. Later that night, I found Fiona sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I hovered in the doorway, awkward and unsure. "I'm sorry," I said finally. She looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For being an ass." I gestured vaguely toward the closet. "I know I'm too attached to stuff. I just don't like the idea of losing pieces of who I am." Her face softened. "I get it. I just don't want us drowning in clutter, you know?" We both smiled, tentative but real. The N64 stayed. So did Nibbles and the Lumpy Bowl. But the snow globes? Those went to Goodwill. The letter came in a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name embossed in gold on the front. I knew what it was before I even opened it. An invitation to join the exclusive Lunar Society. A club so secretive and elite, you'd think it was a cult if it weren't for the fact that its members included a smattering of billionaires, Oscar winners, and people who owned islands. I wasn't supposed to have the invitation. Not really. My inclusion was a fluke, a wild card nomination from my boss, who thought I could use the networking opportunities. Me, a 29-year-old graphic designer who spent half her life doodling weird animals in coffee shops. Somehow, I'd made the cut, and now I had to attend the induction ceremony. An elegant gala held in the penthouse of a luxury skyscraper. The catch? I could bring a single guest. One. It should have been a no-brainer. My best friend, Maya, and I had been inseparable since kindergarten. She was the first person I called when I got the invitation, her shriek of excitement nearly deafening me through the phone. "You have to take me," she'd said, already planning what she'd wear. And I wanted to, of course I did. But as the date got closer, I started to second-guess myself. Maya was she was Maya. Loud, vibrant, impossible to miss. She had this way of taking over any room she entered, her laugh bouncing off walls like a rogue firework. Normally, I love that about her. But the Lunar Society wasn't normal. This was a room full of power players who measured people with scalpel-sharp glances and sized up your worth in the first 2 sentences. What if Maya's exuberance came off as unpolished? What if she said something awkward? What if she outshone me in a space where I couldn't afford to be invisible? Then there was Emma. She was a colleague from work, polished and poised, the kind of person who could wear white without spilling wine on it. We weren't close, but I'd seen her navigate high-stakes client meetings with the ease of someone who'd been born in a boardroom. If I wanted to make a good impression, show the Lunar Society I belonged, it made sense to bring Emma. So, I made the choice. I told Maya the guest list was out of my control, that it was a professional event and I'd been encouraged to bring someone from work. She seemed to take it well over the phone, laughing it off and calling it fancy people nonsense. But when we hung up, there was something clipped in her voice, something that made my stomach churn. The night of the gala, Emma and I arrived at the penthouse, stepping into a world so opulent it felt otherworldly. Walls lined with rare art, waiters weaving through the crowd with trays of gold-dusted hors d'oeuvres, a string quartet playing a haunting melody under a massive crystal chandelier. Emma was perfect, smiling, poised, every bit the model plus one. But I couldn't stop thinking about Maya. I kept imagining her here, the way she'd have made even the coldest billionaire laugh within 5 minutes, how she'd have marveled at the art instead of pretending to recognize it. I sipped my champagne and tried to focus on the conversations around me, but guilt clung to me like static. Then, halfway through the evening, my phone buzzed. A single text from Maya. "Hope you're having fun. Looks magical." Smiley face. Something in me broke. I stared at the message, the little smiley face at the end cutting deeper than any angry rant could have. Maya had never needed to be in the Lunar Society. She didn't care about power or connections. She just wanted to be there for me, to share in something special. and I'd pushed her aside for someone I barely knew, all because I was afraid of being overshadowed. I left the gala early, mumbling an excuse to Emma. I didn't go straight home. I went to Maya's. She opened the door in pajamas, her hair piled into a messy bun, a bowl of popcorn in her hand. "You're back early," she said, raising an eyebrow. I didn't even try to explain myself. Instead, I sank onto her couch and grabbed a handful of popcorn. "You were right," I said. "It was fancy people nonsense." She snorted, plopping down beside me. "Was it at least good nonsense?" "It would have been better with you," I admitted. She paused, studying me for a moment before breaking into a grin. "Damn right it would have." We spent the rest of the night watching terrible rom-coms, the kind with predictable plot twists and absurd meet-cuties. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. Looking back, I know I made the wrong choice. I let my insecurities cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I nearly forgot what mattered most. The Lunar Society won't remember me, and honestly, I don't care if they do. But Maya? She's the one who's been there all along. So, AITA for choosing Emma over Maya? Or did I just learn the hard way that some moments aren't meant to be curated? They're meant to be shared? It started with a fox. Not a real fox, a stupid plush one, orange with bright black eyes, wearing a tiny green scarf. The kind of thing you'd find at a gas station or one of those claw machines in an arcade. My boyfriend, Alex, had won it for me on our first date. He spent a ridiculous amount of money trying to fish it out of the machine, swearing he'd get it this time, until the guy running the prize counter finally handed it over out of pity. At the time, I thought it was adorable, a charming little memento of a perfect night. But as our relationship stretched into its third year, the fox became something else, a battleground. The first skirmish happened during a game night at our place. Our friends were crowded around the living room, snacks spread out on the coffee table, as we tore through a heated round of Pictionary. When it was Alex's turn to draw, he started with a shaky circle, then two pointed ears. Someone shouted, "Cat!" and he shook his head, adding a scribbled tail. "Fox," I guessed, a little too loudly, already reaching for the plush on the shelf where it lived. I grabbed it, waving it in the air like a victory flag. Alex froze, his marker hovering over the page. "It's not a fox." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "It's obviously a fox. It's a wolf." "A wolf? That doesn't look like a wolf." He pointed at the drawing. "See the longer snout? Wolves have longer snouts." "You mean like a fox?" The room broke into laughter, and Alex's face darkened. "I think I know the difference between a fox and a wolf," he muttered. "Do you, though?" I teased, holding up the plush. "Because this guy says otherwise." That should have been the end of it, just a stupid moment in a silly game. But from that point on, the fox became a recurring point of contention. It seemed like every time someone came over, Alex would make a point of correcting me if I called it my fox. "It's not a fox," he'd say, almost reflexively, as if the plush had personally offended him. "It's probably like some generic forest animal. They're not anatomically accurate, you know?" The thing was, Alex didn't even care about the plush. It just sat on the shelf, gathering dust. But I started caring about it, maybe more than I should have. It was my fox. He'd won it for me. Why couldn't he just let me call it what I wanted? The tension hit a breaking point one night at a dinner party with his friends. These weren't our usual crowd. They were Alex's work buddies, the kind of people who used words like synergy unironically. I was already on edge, trying to navigate the polite small talk without saying something dumb, when one of them spotted the fox on the shelf. "Oh, how cute," she said, picking it up. "Is this a fox?" Alex sighed audibly. "It's not a fox." I looked up from my plate. "Yes, it is." He didn't even look at me. "It's just a stuffed animal. It doesn't have to be a specific animal." "Except it is a specific animal," I said, my voice sharpening. "It's a fox." He turned to me, his expression calm but cool. "Why does it even matter? Why does it matter to you?" I shot back. "Why do you care so much about what I call it?" The room went uncomfortably quiet. His friends exchanged glances, clearly unsure if this was a joke or the start of a domestic squabble. Alex gave a tight laugh, trying to defuse the situation. "It doesn't matter." I just think it's funny how insistent you are about it. Funny? I snapped. You're the one who keeps making it a thing. I just want to call it a fox because that's what it is. It's not like I'm trying to rewrite its taxonomic classification. Maybe because you always have to be right, he said, his voice dropping. Even about something as dumb as this. I froze. He'd said it lightly, almost offhand. But there was a weight to the words that made my stomach twist. Always have to be right. Was that what he thought of me? I laughed, brittle and sharp. Fine, I said, standing up. It's not a fox. It's nothing. It's just a stupid plush from a stupid claw machine. I grabbed the fox and threw it onto the couch. Happy now? His friend shifted uncomfortably, mumbling excuses to get more wine or check on dessert. Alex sat there, staring at the fox, then back at me. I didn't mean it like that, he said quietly, but I was already heading for the kitchen. The rest of the night was a blur. His friends left early, clearly eager to escape the awkwardness, and Alex spent the evening giving me space. But the words lingered. You always have to be right. By the next morning, the fox was gone. I didn't ask Alex about it, and he didn't bring it up. For a week, we danced around each other, tiptoeing through conversations as if we were trying not to break something fragile. Then, one evening, I came home to find the fox sitting on the kitchen counter. Only it wasn't the same. Someone had stitched a tiny patch onto its belly with the words, "Definitely not a fox," in bright green thread. I stared at it, my emotions a whirlwind of anger and laughter and something else I couldn't quite name. Alex stepped into the kitchen, hands in his pockets. I thought it might help settle the argument, he said, his tone light but tentative. Or at least make it funnier. I picked up the fox, running my fingers over the stitching. It's still a fox, I said softly, but there was no venom in the words. He smiled. Then it's a fox. We both laughed, the tension breaking like a spell. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a start. AITA for making such a big deal about something so small? Or was it fair to stand my ground over my silly little fox? I was halfway through peeling the label off my beer bottle when my cousin Hannah's fiancé, Kevin, announced he'd quit his job to follow his passion. Everyone at the table turned toward him like he'd just revealed he was the secret heir to a fortune. That's so brave. Hannah gushed, her hands clasped together like she was in a rom-com. Yeah, Kevin said, grinning sheepishly. It's something I've been thinking about for a while, and life's too short not to take risks. What's the passion? My mom asked from her corner of the couch, the polite interest in her tone only slightly undercut by the glass of wine she'd already drained. Pottery, Kevin said, leaning forward like he was unveiling a masterpiece. I've always been drawn to the idea of creating something with my hands. Something tangible. Oh, that's so cool, my sister Jess said, her voice dripping with the kind of enthusiasm she usually reserved for dogs and shoe sales. Have you made anything yet? A couple of bowls, Kevin admitted. But it's more about the journey, Hannah's been so supportive. She's amazing. Everyone murmured their approval, and I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. I knew I shouldn't say anything. I knew, but the words spilled out of me like a car skidding on ice. Must be nice, I said, my tone light but unmistakably sharp. Not everyone can just quit their job and follow their passion. Some of us have bills. The room went quiet for a moment. Hannah's smile faltered, but Kevin, bless him, either didn't notice or decided to plow ahead. Well, yeah, but I've been saving up for this. It's not like I made the decision lightly. Of course, I said, nodding. I just mean, you're lucky to have the option. When I was laid off last year, my journey was figuring out how to keep the lights on without maxing out my credit cards. Sarah, Jess said, shooting me a warning look. It's not a competition. It's not, I said quickly, but let's be real. Not everyone gets to take risks like that. It's worth acknowledging, don't you think? Sure, Kevin said slowly, his grin now a little tighter. But isn't it also about what you're willing to sacrifice? I'm giving up stability to pursue something meaningful. Stability, I repeated, my voice just a touch too loud. Right, because it's not like you have a safety net or anything. Now it was Hannah's turn to step in, her cheeks flushed. He's worked hard for this, Sarah. Just because it's different from your path doesn't mean it's not valid. I never said it wasn't valid, I countered, though I could feel the heat rising in my own face. I'm just saying not everyone gets to wake up one day and decide to be a potter. Some of us have to, survive. Okay, my mom interjected, waving her wine glass like she was refereeing a boxing match. Maybe we can talk about something else? But the damage was done. Hannah glared at me, her arms crossed. Kevin stared at his hands like they were going to start spinning clay right there on the table. I leaned back in my chair, forcing a neutral expression, but my stomach was doing backflips. I hadn't meant to ruin the vibe. I was just honest. Later, after dessert, Jess cornered me in the kitchen while we were rinsing plates. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so no one else would hear. "What?" I said, feigning innocence. "You basically called Kevin a spoiled brat in front of everyone." I didn't say that. I protested, though the defensiveness in my tone betrayed me. Jess rolled her eyes. "You might as well have. Why can't you just let people have their moment? Not everything has to be a debate about who's had it harder." "I wasn't debating," I said, scrubbing at a stubborn spot on a plate. "I was just adding context." "Context?" Jess repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "No, Sarah, you were making it about you. Again." I turned to her, ready to fire back, but her expression stopped me. She looked genuinely upset, and for a second, I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I really that self-centered? Jess sighed, shaking her head. "You're not the only one who's struggled, Just because someone's path looks easier doesn't mean it's less meaningful. Maybe you should think about that before you open your mouth next time." She walked out, leaving me alone with the sink full of suds and my swirling thoughts. I replayed the night in my head, trying to convince myself I was justified. Kevin was lucky, wasn't he? Was it so wrong to point that out? But the look on Jess's face kept nagging at me, and for the first time, I wondered if maybe I was missing something. Back at home, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence was deafening, except for one nagging question that refused to let me sleep. The money was for a dog. Not just any dog, a designer golden doodle puppy that my sister Bree was absolutely in love with. She'd texted me a picture of the fluff ball, along with a string of heart emojis and a desperate plea for help. Apparently, the breeder needed full payment by the end of the week, and Bree was just a little short after an unexpected car repair. "Can you spot me $1,200? She asked over the phone, her voice as sweet as spun sugar. "I swear I'll pay you back by next month. This dog is literally my soulmate." I hesitated. Bree wasn't exactly known for her financial responsibility, but she was my sister, and she sounded so earnest. Besides, how could I say no to that fuzzy little face in the picture? "So, like an idiot," I agreed. Bree showed up the next weekend with the puppy, who she'd named Waffles. "Because he's golden, like syrup," she said, giggling. Waffles was undeniably adorable, but as I watched him chew through the corner of one of my throw pillows, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just made a huge mistake. At first, Bree seemed genuinely grateful. She sent me daily updates about Waffles. Pictures of him chasing his tail, videos of him barking at his reflection, and even a heartfelt "thank you for making this possible" text. But then the updates slowed, and Bree's cheerful texts turned into vague promises. "I'll pay you back soon," she said when I brought it up. "I'm just waiting for my next paycheck." Next paycheck turned into next month. And then, "The holidays are so expensive." And then silence. Meanwhile, I kept seeing Waffles on her Instagram, wrapped in boutique sweaters, lounging on a custom dog bed, frolicking in what looked like a professionally landscaped backyard. It was like watching a reality show about a dog living a better life than me. "Bree," I said when I finally cornered her at a family barbecue, "we need to talk about the money." She laughed nervously, scratching the back of her neck. "Oh, that. Yeah, I'm working on it." "Working on it how?" I pressed. "You're out here buying Waffles gourmet dog treats, but you can't even send me $50? Her face hardened. "Excuse me for wanting to give my dog a good life. Isn't that why you helped me in the first place? Not so you could spoil him while dodging your debt." She sighed dramatically, like I was the unreasonable one. Look, I'll get you your money, okay? Just stop acting like I'm some kind of criminal. Things escalated from there. Bree started avoiding me, and when I finally managed to get her on the phone, she accused me of being obsessed with the loan. It's not like you're hurting for cash, she said. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? Because it is a big deal, Bree. You promised, and now you're acting like it never happened. God, you're so uptight, she snapped. Maybe you should get a dog. Might help you chill out. I hung up on her. A few weeks later, I got a text from our mom. Bree says you're harassing her about some money. What's going on? I explained the situation as calmly as I could, but Mom's response made my blood boil. She's your sister. Can't you just let it go? Let it go. Like $1,200 was pocket change. Like I hadn't been the one cleaning up Bree's messes since we were kids. Like I hadn't bent over backward to help her, only to be treated like the bad guy. The final straw came when I bumped into Bree at a mutual friend's party. She was laughing, drink in hand, while Waffles, wearing a freaking bow tie, was the center of attention. When she saw me, her smile froze. "Oh, hey," she said, trying to sound casual. "Didn't know you'd be here." "Clearly," I said, my voice sharp, "since you've been ignoring my texts." "Come on, not here," she hissed, glancing around. "This is supposed to be a fun night." "For who?" I shot back. "You or your dog?" Her face reddened. "You're seriously embarrassing yourself?" "No, Bree, you're embarrassing yourself. You're acting like I'm the bad guy for expecting you to keep your word. Meanwhile, Waffles has a wardrobe, and I'm still waiting for a single cent." "You're impossible," she snapped. "It's just money. I'll pay you back when I can. But maybe if you weren't so obsessed with controlling me, we wouldn't be in this mess." That was rich, coming from the person who couldn't even control her impulse to buy luxury dog collars. She left the party early, and we haven't spoken since. Our mom keeps telling me to be the bigger person, but I'm tired of being the family doormat. The money isn't even the point anymore. It's the principle. Bree doesn't just owe me $1,200. She owes me respect, and I don't think I'll ever get either. I didn't suspect anything when Miles started rearranging the living room furniture at 9 a.m. He was always doing weird things. Once, he spent an entire weekend turning our coat closet into a Zen meditation zone, complete with a tiny indoor fountain that made the hallway smell like algae for months. So when he moved the coffee table into the corner and started unfurling a tarp in the middle of the floor, I figured he'd just found another eccentric project to obsess over. "What's the tarp for?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "Can't tell you," Miles said, grinning like a kid with a secret stash of candy. "But you're gonna love it. Just make sure you're free tonight." That was my first clue that something was up. Tonight was supposed to be my surprise night. I had spent weeks planning the ultimate nostalgia-fueled throwback evening for us. Miles and I had been inseparable since college, and some of our best memories revolved around those late nights spent marathoning terrible old movies in my dorm room while eating instant noodles. So, I'd gone full out. I rented a projector, dug up our favorite old films, and even bought an ancient, discontinued brand of microwave popcorn Miles always raved about but hadn't had in years. The plan was to set it all up in the backyard, complete with fairy lights and beanbags, to recreate those nights in our quirky little way. But now, watching him haul a bucket of paint into the living room, I was starting to worry. "Do I get a hint?" I asked. "Not a chance," he said, smirking. "You'll ruin the surprise." By mid-afternoon, the tarp had become a battlefield of colors. Miles darted around like a mad scientist, smearing streaks of paint across a massive canvas propped against the wall. At one point, he stood back, hands on hips, squinting at his work as if it might tell him its secrets. "Are you painting something, or just going full Jackson Pollock?" I teased. Miles winked. "You'll see. Just be ready at 7. By 6:30, I was pacing the backyard, checking and rechecking my setup. The projector worked perfectly, the popcorn smelled like buttered nostalgia, and the fairy lights cast a warm glow over the beanbags. It was all coming together, except for one glaring issue. How was I supposed to get Miles out here without ruining his surprise? At 6:45, I cracked. Hey, Miles? Yeah, he called from the living room, where he was furiously cleaning his paintbrushes. Quick question, is your thing mobile? There was a pause. What? Like, can it be done outside? No, why would it? Wait, why? I winced, realizing I'd backed myself into a corner. Because I, kind of have a surprise too. And it's outside. Miles appeared in the doorway, a paint-smeared towel over his shoulder. You planned something? Yeah, a movie night, I admitted, waving toward the backyard. Old school style. It's kind of a big deal. I rented a projector and everything. He blinked at me, his expression unreadable. And you didn't tell me? It was supposed to be a surprise. Miles laughed, shaking his head. Unbelievable. We both planned surprises for the same night. Yeah, but yours is whatever's happening in there, I said, gesturing vaguely toward the tarp. Can we combine them somehow? He hesitated, then snapped his fingers. Wait, what if we combine them? Like, literally. Explain. Miles grabbed my hand, dragging me into the living room. Okay, hear me out. I've been working on this crazy idea for weeks. It's a giant collage of all the places and things that remind me of us. Movie ticket stubs, concert posters, that awful flyer from the mime class you made me take. You love that class. And I thought we could finish it together tonight. But now I'm thinking, what if we do it outside? Under your fairy lights? While we watch the movies? I stared at him, caught off guard by how thoughtful it all was. You're serious? Why not? Your setup looks amazing, and we can multitask. Paint, popcorn, and cheesy old films. It's peak us. It was a wild idea, but then again, wild ideas were Miles' specialty. Okay, I said finally. Let's do it. By 7:30, we had transformed the backyard into a chaotic mix of creativity and nostalgia. The collage was spread across a folding table, surrounded by jars of paint and random scraps of memorabilia. The first movie flickered onto the screen. Some laughably bad sci-fi flick we'd loved as broke students. And Miles handed me a brush with a mischievous grin. First stroke is yours, he said. I dipped the brush into a swirl of blues and greens, adding a streak to the canvas. Miles followed with a bold splash of red, and soon we were laughing, teasing, and accidentally smearing paint on each other as the movie played in the background. By the time the final credits rolled, our collage was a riot of colors, memories, and inside jokes only we would understand. Miles sat back, surveying our work with a satisfied grin. Not bad for a last-minute mashup, he said. Not bad at all, I agreed, leaning against him as the fairy lights twinkled above us. The night hadn't gone as planned. Neither of our surprises had unfolded exactly the way we'd imagined. But somewhere between the chaos and the compromise, it had turned into something better than either of us could have pulled off alone. Still, as I scraped dried paint off my arm later, I couldn't help but wonder if I should have just let Miles have his moment. So, AITA? I didn't mean to steal the gnome. Let me get that out of the way first. It was dark, I was tired, and to be honest, I thought it was garbage. Who puts a garden gnome on the curb next to a stack of old newspapers and a broken chair? In my defense, it looked abandoned, like the kind of thing you'd leave out for someone to take. So I took it. I figured I'd clean it up, give it a fresh coat of paint, and add it to my own sad little balcony garden. I didn't realize it belonged to Karen. Karen is the kind of neighbor who bakes cookies for the neighborhood potluck and then spends the entire event loudly hinting at how much effort she put into them. She's the president of the HOA and has a voice that could cut glass. I swear. She knows when a leaf lands on your lawn and expects you to rake it up within the hour. Her house is immaculate, her flower beds are manicured, and her front yard is full of whimsical garden ornaments. Mushrooms, fairies, and, apparently, gnomes. The gnome wasn't gone for 24 hours before Karen showed up on my doorstep. She had a photo in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Have you seen this? She demanded, shoving the picture at me. It was a grainy printout of a gnome, the same one currently sitting on my balcony. No, I lied, trying to keep a straight face. What's the deal? She narrowed her eyes. It's missing, and it's not just any gnome. It's part of a limited edition collection, hand-painted. Wow, I said, faking surprise. That's rough. I hope you find it. She stared at me a moment longer, as if she could smell the guilt wafting off me, but eventually, she left. I thought that would be the end of it. How wrong I was. The next morning, Karen went full Sherlock Holmes. Flyers appeared on every mailbox in the neighborhood. Missing gnome. Reward for safe return. No questions asked. She even set up a neighborhood watch meeting to discuss recent thefts, as if our suburban street was suddenly riddled with crime. I didn't go, but apparently, she gave an impassioned speech about community values and respecting personal property. I should have just returned the stupid thing, but by then, it felt too late. I'd already touched it up, painting its little hat a bright red and giving its cheeks a rosy glow. It looked way better than before, and I couldn't bring myself to give it back. So, I kept quiet. That's when the real madness started. Karen decided to install cameras. Not just 1 or 2, but 5, all pointed at various parts of her yard. Every time I walked by her house, I could feel them watching me. Then, as if that wasn't enough, she put up a sign in her yard. This property is under surveillance. I could barely take my trash out without feeling like I was being interrogated by Big Brother. It didn't stop there. Karen started questioning everyone. She cornered Mr. Patel while he was watering his hydrangeas, grilled the kids who played basketball in the cul-de-sac, and even interrogated sweet old Mrs. Nguyen about her knitting group. Rumors swirled. One day, I overheard her on the phone, whispering about how she thought the gnome napper might strike again. That gave me an idea. Late one night, I snuck out with a second gnome, one I'd picked up at a thrift store. It was ugly, with a crooked hat and chipped paint, but I didn't care. I planted it in Karen's yard, right where the original had been. Then I taped a note to its tiny shovel. Let this be a warning. You'll never catch me. The gnome bandit. The next day, Karen lost her mind. She called an emergency HOA meeting and went on a tirade about brazen criminal activity. The entire neighborhood showed up, mostly because they wanted to see what she'd do next. This is a direct attack on our way of life, Karen shouted, holding up the ugly gnome like it was evidence in a murder trial. We cannot let this stand. Meanwhile, I sat in the back, biting my lip to keep from laughing. For a while, it seemed like Karen might give up. She stopped handing out flyers and took down the sign in her yard. I thought I'd won, until I found the flyer on my car windshield. We know who you are. Return the gnome before things get worse. I started to panic. Was she bluffing? Did she really know it was me? I decided to play it safe. That night, I wrapped the original gnome in a towel, left it on her porch, and rang the bell before sprinting back to my apartment. It felt good to finally be free of the thing. But Karen wasn't satisfied. A week later, I woke up to find my balcony garden had been trashed. My pots were overturned, my herbs were shredded, and in the middle of the carnage was a note. Gnomes protect their own. I stormed over to Karen's house, ready to demand an explanation, but she just smiled sweetly and said, I don't know what you're talking about. Now, we're locked in a Cold War. She's put up even more cameras, and I've started rigging my balcony with fake tripwires. Every so often, I'll find one of her gnomes turned slightly toward my apartment, like they're watching me. In retaliation, I've started ordering random gnome-themed items, mugs, t-shirts, doormats, and having them delivered to her address. The neighborhood loves it. People have started calling it the Great Gnome Feud. Kids bike past Karen's house yelling, Gnome Thief, while she shakes her fist and glares at my balcony. I know I should probably move on, but part of me wants to see how far she'll go. So, AITA? I wasn't supposed to be in the library after hours. Technically, nobody was. The place shut down at 9 p.m. sharp, no exceptions, and the staff made sure to hustle every patron out the door with precision bordering on military efficiency. But my boss had forgotten her laptop in one of the study rooms, and being the team player, red, pushover that I am, I offered to pick it up since I lived nearby. Don't worry, she said. I'll call the security guy and let him know you're coming. He'll let you in. Simple enough. I drove over, parked in the near-empty lot, and found the security guard, a gruff, wiry man named Dale, waiting for me by the front entrance. He looked like he was one bad day away from quitting, but he waved me inside without much fuss. 15 minutes, he said. That's all you're getting. I locked this place up at 9:30 sharp. Got it, I said, holding up my hands. In and out. The library at night felt different. During the day, it buzzed with quiet energy, whispered conversations, the soft hum of computers, the faint rustle of book pages turning. But now, with the lights dimmed and the silence stretching out like a living thing, it felt wrong. I made my way to the second-floor study rooms, the rubber soles of my sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The door to room 214 was ajar, just as my boss had described. Her laptop sat on the table, right where she'd left it. I grabbed it, slipped it into the bag I'd brought, and turned to leave. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping sound. I froze. It came again, soft, deliberate, and definitely not the creaking of an old building settling. It was coming from the far end of the hall. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting it. The sound stopped. For a second, I considered ignoring it and heading back downstairs. Dale was waiting, and I didn't want to risk getting locked in, but something about the sound nagged at me, like an itch in the back of my brain. Curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me, and I walked toward the end of the hallway. The tapping started again, faster now, like fingers drumming against a wooden surface. "Is someone there?" I asked, my voice echoing. Nothing. I rounded the corner and stopped in front of a door marked Archives. It was locked, but the tapping was louder now, almost frantic. Against every shred of common sense I possessed, I leaned in close, pressing my ear to the wood. "Help me." I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice was faint, muffled, but unmistakable. "Help me," it repeated. I should have bolted. I should have run downstairs, told Dale there was something weird going on, and left him to deal with it. But instead, I did the dumbest thing imaginable. I looked for a way to open the door. There was a keypad next to the handle, the kind that required a code. I didn't have the faintest idea what it could be, but I noticed a faint smear of something on the numbers, something dark and dried. My stomach churned. I pressed the numbers with the most visible wear, 1-9-2-4. The lock clicked. The air inside the archives was colder, damp, and smelled faintly of earth and mildew. Rows of shelves stretched out before me, filled with old books, newspapers, and documents. "Hello?" I whispered, stepping inside. The door slammed shut behind me, and the lights flickered. "Help me," the voice said again, clearer now. It was coming from deeper within the archives. I should have left. I knew that, but something compelled me forward. The sound of my footsteps on the concrete floor echoed in the stillness. And then I saw it. A figure. It stood at the far end of the aisle, its back to me, its silhouette unnaturally thin. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, a grotesque prop left behind for some reason. But then it moved, its head tilting ever so slightly in my direction. "Help me," it said again, though its mouth didn't move. I couldn't breathe. My legs refused to work. I was rooted to the spot, staring at this thing as it began to turn around. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a blank, featureless void. The lights flickered again, and suddenly it was closer. "Help me," it said, the voice twisting, overlapping itself, as if a dozen voices were speaking at once. I ran. I didn't care about being quiet, didn't care if Dale heard me or thought I was crazy. I sprinted down the aisle, back toward the door, which, thank God, was still unlocked. I slammed it shut behind me and bolted down the stairs, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own panicked breaths. When I reached the front entrance, Dale was waiting, his arms crossed. "You okay?" he asked, his brows furrowed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Did you hear that?" I stammered. "Hear what?" "The tapping. I stopped. There was no way to explain it without sounding insane. He shook his head. "You've got 10 seconds before I lock up. Better get going." I didn't argue. I practically threw myself into my car and sped out of the parking lot. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying what I'd seen, what I'd heard. Part of me wondered if it had been a hallucination, a trick of the dim lighting and my overactive imagination. But then, as I was lying in bed, my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail. "Help me." AITA for opening the door? Or did I just make the worst mistake of my life? It began with a book. Not just any book, though. A worn, leather-bound journal that I found buried in a box of my grandmother's belongings. We were cleaning out her house after the funeral, sorting through decades of memories and knickknacks, when I stumbled across it. The spine creaked as I opened it, revealing pages filled with elegant, looping handwriting. It wasn't a journal, exactly, more like a collection of letters, all addressed to my darling. I sat down on the dusty floor, captivated. The letters were dated throughout the late 1960s and early 70s, and they painted a picture of a love affair that was equal parts passionate and heartbreaking. But the most shocking part? The letters weren't to my grandfather. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, or some kind of creative writing project, but the more I read, the clearer it became. My grandmother had been in love with someone else, a man named Arthur. The entries were full of longing and regret. She wrote about stolen weekends and whispered promises, about how she dreamed of running away with him but couldn't leave her family behind. By the time I reached the final entry, dated just a month before she married my grandfather, I felt like I'd unearthed a secret treasure. My grandmother, stoic, proper, never one for dramatics, had lived a life I couldn't have imagined. I should have left it there. I should have kept it to myself, tucked it away as a private revelation about the woman who raised me. But instead, I brought it up at family dinner the next night. We were all sitting around the table, my mom, dad, siblings, and a few cousins, when I casually mentioned the journal. So, did you guys know Grandma had an epic love affair with someone named Arthur? I said, half laughing, expecting some kind of amused surprise. The table went silent. My mom set down her fork, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" she asked slowly. I explained, waving it off like it was no big deal. "I found this journal in her things. It's full of letters to this guy Arthur. I mean, it's kind of romantic, right? Like a Nicholas Sparks novel." My dad's face darkened. "You shouldn't have read that," he said sharply. "Oh, come on," I replied, laughing nervously. "It's not like Grandma would have minded. She clearly had a whole secret life. It's fascinating." That's when my mom stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. "And you had no right to bring this up. Not here. Not like this." She stormed out of the room, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence. Later, my dad pulled me aside. His voice was low, furious. That Arthur wasn't just some fling. He was someone your grandmother loved before she met your grandfather. They had a history, a complicated one. She made her choice to stay with your grandfather, and she took that secret to her grave. And now you've ripped it open. I tried to defend myself. I didn't mean to upset anyone. I thought it was just a piece of family history. Something beautiful, even. "Beautiful," he hissed. "You think it's beautiful to drag up a secret that could hurt this family? Your grandfather idolized her. If he ever knew..." He broke off, shaking his head. That night, I couldn't sleep. Part of me felt guilty, but another part was frustrated. Why was everyone acting like I'd committed some cardinal sin? The journal wasn't malicious, it was honest. Real. Why should we pretend it didn't exist? But things only got worse. My mom wouldn't talk to me for days, and when she finally did, it was to demand I hand over the journal. "This isn't yours to keep," she said coldly. Reluctantly, I gave it to her, though it felt like I was betraying my grandmother by letting it be locked away. Her words silenced again. I thought that was the end of it, but a week later, my cousin Emily called me, breathless with excitement. "I found out who Arthur was," she said. "What?" "I did some digging," she continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Arthur wasn't just some random guy. He was married to someone else. They had an affair for years before Grandma broke it off." My head spun. "How do you know this?" "I talked to Aunt Margaret," Emily said, referring to our grandmother's younger sister. "She said the whole family knew about it back then, but it was this huge scandal, so they buried it. And get this, Arthur lived 2 blocks away from Grandma and Grandpa. He was practically in their lives the whole time." The revelation was like a bomb going off in my brain. Suddenly, everything made sense. The tension, the secrecy. The way my mom and dad reacted. This wasn't just a love story. It was a landmine, and I'd stomped on it without thinking. Now, my family's divided. My mom refuses to speak to Aunt Margaret for sharing the truth. My cousins are obsessed with piecing together more details, like amateur detectives. And my dad is furious with me for ever bringing the journal to light in the first place. Was I wrong to share it? Should I have kept my grandmother's secret buried, like she clearly wanted? Or does the truth deserve to be known, no matter how messy it is? AITA? When Sammy proposed we get a snake, I thought she was messing with me. I'd always considered myself more of a furry pet person. Cats, dogs, maybe a rabbit. Something with paws and a snuggly disposition. But Sammy, with her endless documentaries about reptiles and her childhood tales of catching garden snakes in her backyard, had other ideas. We need something low maintenance, she explained, scrolling through a local reptile shop's Instagram page. A ball python is perfect. They're basically little noodles that hang out. Plus, they only eat once a week. A snake, I said, flatly. You want us to co-parent a literal predator. She grinned, undeterred. Don't be dramatic. It'll be fun. We can name her Medusa. That was Sammy, always pulling me into her eccentric little schemes. I didn't love the idea, but after weeks of, look at how cute this one is, and did you know snakes only poop like once a month? I finally caved. One Saturday afternoon, we walked into the reptile shop and left with a baby ball python, complete with a glass terrarium, heat lamp, and a frozen packet of, God help me, mice. Medusa, as Sammy had promised, was fascinating. She spent most of her time coiled up under her hide, only slithering out occasionally to investigate her new surroundings. I wasn't thrilled about handling her at first, but Sammy was fearless, letting Medusa wind herself around her arm like a scaly bracelet. See? She's sweet, Sammy said, holding her out to me. Medusa flicked her tongue in my direction, and I reluctantly extended a hand. That was the honeymoon phase. For a while, it worked. Sammy was in charge of feeding and handling Medusa, while I took on terrarium maintenance. It was an unspoken deal, and it felt balanced. But then Sammy got busy. Her workload ramped up, deadlines, late nights, and a seemingly endless parade of Zoom meetings. Suddenly, her evening routine of thawing mice and dangling them with tongs in front of Medusa fell by the wayside. Can you feed her tonight? Sammy asked one evening, typing furiously on her laptop. I've got to finish this report. Sure, I said, though the thought of defrosting a rodent wasn't exactly appealing. Medusa, unbothered by my hesitation, gobbled the mouse with a swift snap of her jaws. I shuddered but told myself it was a one-off. It wasn't. Within weeks, Sammy's one-time favors became regular duties. Feeding, spot cleaning, water changes, it all fell to me. I'd come home to find Medusa looking at me from her terrarium, her little snake brain probably wondering why her other human had gone AWOL. One night, after I'd spent half an hour scrubbing snake poop off her fake log hide, I finally snapped. Sammy, I said, standing in the doorway of her office, holding the offending object like it was Exhibit A in a crime scene. We need to talk. She glanced up from her laptop, distracted. What's up? What's up? I repeated, incredulous. What's up is that I've been the sole caretaker of our snake for weeks. You were the one who wanted her, remember? I do take care of her, Sammy said, frowning. When? I shot back. Because I'm the one feeding her. I'm the one cleaning her terrarium. I even adjusted the heat lamp the other day because it was too cold. She sighed, leaning back in her chair. I've been busy. It's not like I'm neglecting her. She's a snake. She doesn't even know what day it is. That's not the point, I said, frustrated. The point is, this was supposed to be a shared responsibility. You were so excited to get her, and now I feel like I'm the only one who actually cares. I do care, Sammy insisted. I just thought you liked taking care of her. I blinked, stunned. Liked? Sammy, I'm not bonding with her over coffee. I'm defrosting dead mice and scrubbing reptile poop while you're pretending she doesn't exist. She winced. Okay, that's not fair. Isn't it? I countered. You brought her into our lives. You convinced me it would be fun. And now I feel like I'm a single parent to a cold-blooded predator. Her face softened, but I could see the irritation simmering beneath. I didn't mean for it to turn out this way. I'll help more, I promise. Will you? I asked, crossing my arms. Because this isn't the first time we've had this conversation, and Medusa deserves better. Sammy didn't answer right away. She looked at me, then at the terrarium, where Medusa was peeking out from under her hide, her black eyes unblinking. Okay, she said finally, her voice quieter. I'll step up. Starting now. That night, Sammy fed Medusa for the first time in weeks. She cleaned the terrarium too, even though it took her twice as long as it took me. I wanted to believe things would change, but deep down, I wasn't sure. Sammy was great at promises, but follow-through? Not so much. A few days later, I came home to find the heat lamp off and Medusa curled up in an unusually tight coil, clearly trying to conserve warmth. I checked the thermostat. It was too cold for her. Furious, I texted Sammy. Did you forget to turn the lamp on? Her reply came back quickly. I thought you did. I stared at the screen, my frustration boiling over. Medusa didn't ask for this. She didn't choose to live in a glass box in our apartment, dependent on humans who couldn't seem to get their act together. She deserved better. That night, Sammy and I had another fight. This time, it wasn't just about Medusa. It was about us. About how her enthusiasm for things often burned bright but short, leaving me to clean up the ashes. I don't want to resent you, I said finally, my voice tired, but I can't keep doing this alone. Sammy looked at me, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. You're right. I messed up. I wanted her, and I dropped the ball. I'll do better. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as I watched Medusa flick her tongue at the glass, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd already let her down. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to let myself down too. It was the cucumber slices that finally broke us. Not in the dramatic, throw-a-plate sort of way, but in the quiet, simmering way arguments creep in when you've lived with someone long enough to notice the tiny cracks. Jamie had peeled them too thick, so the slices looked clunky instead of the delicate, translucent circles they were supposed to be. We were supposed to be making tzatziki together, a cute couples activity we decided on after seeing a cooking show. But instead of fun, it felt like a low-stakes game of sabotage. These are fine, Jamie said, holding up a particularly chunky slice. They're cucumbers, not Faberge eggs. They're supposed to blend, I said, gesturing toward the yogurt. You think these slabs are going to blend? Jamie huffed, tossed the knife on the cutting board, and leaned against the counter. If you care that much, maybe you should do it. Maybe I should, I snapped, grabbing the knife. You never pay attention to details. Jamie raised their eyebrows. You're still mad about the pet thing. I froze mid-chop. I am not mad about the pet thing. You bring it up every chance you get. You bring it up more. We stood there, glaring at each other across a battlefield of cucumbers and garlic, and I realized the pet argument wasn't over. It had metastasized, spreading into every corner of our lives like ivy creeping into cracks. This wasn't how it started. It started innocently, like a slow breeze turning into a storm. We were binging a reality show about tiny homes, which was our guilty pleasure. One episode featured a woman who had converted her entire kitchen into a climbing wall for her 5 cats. That's too much, I said, shoving a handful of popcorn into my mouth. I think it's sweet, Jamie said. She made the space perfect for them. You'd turn a kitchen into a cat jungle? Jamie grinned. Maybe. It was a joke, or at least it started as one. But then a week later, we were at brunch with Jamie's friends when they casually said, we're thinking about getting a pet. Dog, I said. Cat, Jamie said at the same time. The table erupted in laughter, but Jamie and I just smiled stiffly. On the walk home, the tension bubbled over. I can't do a cat, I said, stuffing my hands into my jacket pockets. I don't want my apartment to smell like a litter box. Our apartment, Jamie corrected. And that's such a stereotype. Cats are clean. Sure, until they start scratching the furniture. Dogs chew everything, Jamie snapped. Shoes, pillows, table legs. And they're loud. Loud is fun, I argued. Dogs are exciting. Cats are just decoration. Jamie stopped walking. Did you just call cats decoration? I stopped too, turning to face them. You know what I mean. They're aloof. Jamie's jaw tightened. They're not aloof. They're independent. There's a difference. It was like we were speaking two different languages. Jamie talked about cats like they were mystical beings sent to heal your soul with a soft purr and the occasional flick of their tail. I talked about dogs like they were your goofy best friend, dragging you into adventures whether you were ready or not. We couldn't even agree on what companion meant. The debate seeped into everything after that. Jamie left adoption pamphlets for Maine Coons and ragdolls on the coffee table. I started following Instagram accounts of people hiking with their border collies. When Jamie brought home a toy mouse, just to see if it felt right, I retaliated by borrowing my neighbor's golden retriever for a weekend walk, hoping Jamie would have a revelation. Instead, the dog knocked over Jamie's iced coffee, and Jamie muttered under their breath, "Exactly why I don't want one." The turning point came on a rainy Wednesday night. We were both exhausted, scrolling through our phones on opposite sides of the couch. Jamie suddenly said, "What about a snake?" "A snake?" I said, laughing before I realized they were serious. "No way." Jamie shrugged. "They're quiet. No fur. Low maintenance. I'm not waking up to find a python staring at me. Hard pass." "Well, what do you suggest?" Jamie snapped. "Because I'm not getting a dog. And I'm not getting a cat." I shot back. "So where does that leave us?" The room fell silent. The rain pattered against the window, and I realized we were at an impasse. Jamie put down their phone and looked at me. "This is stupid." "Yeah," I agreed. "It's just a pet." Jamie sighed. "But it's not though, is it?" And that was the truth. It wasn't just about cats or dogs. It was about what those choices said about us. Jamie wanted something calm, something that fit into their idea of a peaceful life. I wanted something wild, something that pushed me out of my comfort zone. A cat was Jamie's sanctuary. A dog was my adventure. The fact that we couldn't agree felt like a crack in the foundation of our relationship. That's how we ended up at a pet therapy event downtown. An experiment to see if we could vibe with each other's preferences. Jamie spent most of the afternoon doting on an orange tabby named Milo, who sat on their lap like he'd been born there. I tried to engage with the cat, but Milo made it clear he only had eyes for Jamie. Meanwhile, I fell in love with a rescue mutt named Benny. He wagged his tail so hard when I crouched down that he toppled over, and I laughed so loud Jamie turned to glare at me. "You're bonding," they said dryly. "You're just jealous because Milo doesn't do tricks." "Cats don't need to do tricks," Jamie shot back. We left the event more divided than ever, but at least we'd learned something. Neither of us could fake love for the other's choice. Last week, I found an ad online for a cat and dog duo looking for a home. Their names were Pickles and Pancake. I showed Jamie the photo. Pickles, a smug gray tabby, was perched on top of Pancake, a floppy-eared spaniel with eyes the size of dinner plates. "Too much work," Jamie said, but I caught the tiny smile tugging at their lips. "Think about it," I said. "They've already figured out how to live together." "Unlike us," Jamie muttered, but they didn't close the tab. So now we're in limbo. Pickles and Pancake are still up for adoption, and every time I check the listing, my heart does this stupid little flip. Jamie hasn't said no, but they haven't said yes either. We've stopped fighting about it, but the cucumber incident was proof. This isn't over. AITA? When I signed us up for the Cooking Through History workshop, I thought it sounded perfect. I'm a sucker for historical reenactments, and my girlfriend Mara loves cooking. The class promised a deep dive into the culinary traditions of ancient Rome, complete with togas and authentic recipes from Apicius, the first ever cookbook. Mara thought it was hilarious. "You mean to tell me we're gonna cook wearing bedsheets?" "Yes," I said, already picturing myself as a noble patrician dining on peacock and honeyed wine. She snorted but agreed. The studio was decorated like a Roman villa, or a high school drama set pretending to be one. Marble columns, fake. Clay amphory, probably also fake. And tables draped in red and gold linens. They even had laurel wreaths for us to wear. Mara popped hers on and struck a regal pose. "I am Mara, Empress of questionable life choices." Bring me grapes. I laughed, but I couldn't help noticing how effortlessly she looked the part. I, on the other hand, felt like a toga-clad fraud, clutching the handout with the recipe for patina de pyrus, a layered pear and cheese dish baked in honey. It sounded both fancy and oddly unappetizing. Chef Antonius, his real name was Tony, but he was committed to the bit, began the class with a dramatic monologue about the grandeur of ancient Roman feasts. "You will work as pairs," he said, "to recreate these delicacies as they would have been served in Caesar's time. Precision is key." Roman cooking was not about improvisation. Mara's face lit up with mischief. Improvisation was her favorite thing. I shot her a warning look. "No freestyling," I whispered. "We're making history, not a jazz concert." She raised her hands innocently. "I'll follow the recipe." Scout's honor. The first step was to slice and poach the pears in spiced wine. Easy enough. I meticulously measured the wine and sprinkled in the cinnamon and pepper as the recipe instructed. Mara, meanwhile, was cutting the pears into uneven chunks, tossing them into the pot like a child feeding ducks at a pond. Those are supposed to be sliced," I pointed out. "Who cares? They're gonna get cooked anyway," she said, stirring them with the enthusiasm of someone who'd already moved on mentally to dessert. I sighed and adjusted the heat under the pot. "We're supposed to be authentic." "This is authentic," she argued. "Do you think Roman peasants worried about presentation? They probably threw whatever they had into a pot and called it a day." "We're not peasants," I hissed. "We're patricians. There's a difference." She smirked. "Tell that to your wrinkly toga." When it came time to prepare the cheese layer, things got worse. The recipe called for finely grated pecorino romano mixed with egg yolks and honey. I was painstakingly grating the cheese into a fluffy pile when I noticed Mara dumping in random amounts of honey and yolks without measuring. "Mara, that's way too much honey." She dipped her finger into the bowl and tasted it. "Nah, it's perfect. Sweet and tangy, like me. You're going to ruin it." "Or," she said, with that infuriating grin, "I'm going to improve it. Romans loved honey, right?" I'm leaning into the vibe. I muttered something about historical inaccuracy and went back to my careful layering. Pears, cheese mixture, more pears. Mara, on the other hand, slathered her dish like she was making a lasagna for a Roman family reunion. Chef Antonius passed by our station and inspected our progress. He gave my dish a nod of approval, then paused at Mara's. His expression was a mix of horror and fascination. "This is not traditional," he said finally. "It's rustic," Mara corrected, winking at him. He opened his mouth to argue, but then walked away, muttering something about barbarians. When the dishes came out of the oven, I was feeling pretty smug. Mine looked golden and delicate, like the picture on the handout. Mara's looked like a pear volcano had erupted and been struck by lightning. We presented our dishes for tasting. Chef Antonius tried mine first. He chewed slowly, nodded, and said, "Very accurate. Well done." Then he tried Mara's. His eyebrows shot up. "This is bold. It's not Roman, but..." He took another bite. "It has charm." "Charm," Mara whispered to me, elbowing me in triumph. "Hear that? I charmed him." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. Of course she charmed him. She could charm a rabid bear. When the class ended, we packed up our leftovers and walked to the car. "You know," she said, nibbling on a piece of her chaotic pear casserole, "for all your griping, you have to admit mine is more memorable." "Memorable doesn't mean better," I countered. "You butchered the recipe." "I elevated it," she insisted. "Look, you're all about following rules and respecting tradition, and that's fine. But sometimes you've got to bend the rules a little to make something fun." "It's history," I argued. "It's not supposed to be fun." "Maybe that's the problem," she said, popping the rest of the pear into her mouth. I thought about it as we drove home, her words lingering like the faint taste of honey on my tongue. Maybe she had a point. Maybe history, like cooking, wasn't just about preserving the past. Maybe it was about interpreting it in a way that felt alive. Still, I can't help but wonder. AITA for wanting to honor tradition? Or is Mara right that sometimes breaking the rules is the best way to keep the spirit alive? It started with a stray thought. one of those passing flickers of mischief that should have stayed in my brain where it belonged. But, as always, my mouth had other plans. The setting? My office, where the rarest of events was taking place. A retirement party for Greg, the world's most boring coworker. You've met a Greg. Every office has one. He's the guy who double-checks everyone's email grammar, corrects you on the pronunciation of niche, and wears the same pair of khakis so often they've practically achieved sentience. Greg was an institution at our company, a walking spreadsheet with a soul made of sticky notes. And now, after 35 years of doing whatever it is Greg does anyone actually know? He was retiring. HR threw together a send-off in the break room, complete with lukewarm coffee and a sheet cake that tasted like cardboard optimism. The speeches had started about 10 minutes ago, and I was already regretting showing up. Our boss, a man whose personality could be replaced by an auto-reply email, was droning on about Greg's dedication and unwavering attention to detail. The room was filled with forced smiles and polite nods, the kind of energy you only get at events where attendance is mandatory. I stood there, sipping my too-sweet punch, wondering how much longer I'd have to fake enthusiasm before I could escape. And then the PowerPoint began. Yes, they'd made a PowerPoint. It was a timeline of Greg's career, starting from 1988, complete with blurry photos and cheesy captions like, "The Greg Inning." Each slide brought another wave of monotony. Greg's first desk, Greg at the company picnic, Greg's Employee of the Month certificate from 1996. It was like watching someone narrate a black-and-white movie about beige. By the time we got to the slide titled Greg's Greatest Hits, which, by the way, was just a list of quarterly reports he'd apparently nailed, I could feel my sanity slipping. And that's when the idea hit me. A joke. A little spice to liven up this stale loaf of a party. Greg was standing at the front of the room, blushing under the fluorescent lights as our boss handed him a plaque. It read, "Thank you for 35 years of excellence." I stifled a laugh. Excellence? This was the same guy who once sent an all-staff email about a stapler going missing. Our boss beamed and said, "Greg, we'll never forget your contributions. You've been an inspiration to all of us." I couldn't help myself. I raised my cup of punch and, in a perfectly timed lull, called out, "To Greg, the only man who could make accounting software updates sound exciting." The room froze. For a second, I thought I'd nailed it. There were a few nervous chuckles from the back, and one guy near the donuts coughed into his napkin like he was trying not to laugh. But Greg? Oh no, Greg didn't laugh. His blush deepened into a tomato red, and his mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Our boss glared at me, the kind of glare that makes you feel like you've been caught stealing office supplies. "Thank you, Alex," he said through clenched teeth. "But let's keep the focus on Greg's accomplishments." "Of course," I said, raising my hands in mock surrender. It was just a joke. You know, to celebrate the excitement of it all. The boss ignored me and moved on, but the damage was done. The mood in the room shifted. People stopped clapping as enthusiastically. Greg's smile, which had been strained to begin with, disappeared entirely. He looked like a balloon that had just been punctured. I tried to catch his eye, maybe mouth an apology, but he wouldn't look at me. After the speeches ended, I made my way to the table of refreshments, thinking it was best to lay low. That's when Marcy from HR cornered me. "What were you thinking?" she hissed, her arms crossed. "It was a joke," I said, defensively. I was trying to lighten the mood. "You humiliated him," she said. "This is his retirement. He deserved respect, not whatever that was." "It wasn't that bad," I argued. "Greg's not some fragile flower. He can take a joke." Marcy gave me a look so scathing it could have peeled paint. "He's spent 35 years here, and your takeaway is that he's boring? Do you realize how dismissive that sounded?" I wanted to argue, to point out that the PowerPoint alone had done more to bore people than my comment ever could. But before I could respond, Greg walked by, carrying his plaque like it was a piece of evidence from a crime scene. He didn't even look at me. The rest of the party was agony. People avoided me, conversations hushed as I approached. By the time I left, I felt like I'd been exiled. It's been a week now, and the incident hasn't blown over. People at the office are still talking about the comment. Greg hasn't spoken to me, and Marcy sent out a memo about maintaining professionalism during company events. Even my friends at work told me I probably shouldn't have said anything. But I don't get it. Sure, maybe it wasn't the perfect moment, but it was a harmless joke. Greg's retiring. He's done. He's not going to lose sleep over this, right? Besides, isn't it better to leave people laughing than sitting through another slide about Greg's legacy and filing systems? So now I'm left wondering if everyone else is just overreacting, or if I really did cross a line. AITA? The box arrived without warning, sitting on Mara's dining table as if it had always been there. She didn't see anyone deliver it, didn't hear a knock at the door. It was just there. It wasn't large, roughly the size of a toaster, but its surface shimmered like oil on water, shifting colors depending on how the light hit it. No label, no seams, just a faint symbol etched into the top, a circle with 3 intersecting lines, like an abstract compass. She shouldn't have touched it. Every instinct told her to leave it alone, to call someone, anyone, to deal with it. But curiosity gnawed at her like an itch she couldn't scratch. When she pressed her fingers against the symbol, the box clicked open soundlessly. Inside was a single, delicate object, a pair of glasses with thin, black frames. At first, they looked ordinary, but as she lifted them closer, she noticed something peculiar. The lenses weren't clear. They shimmered with a faint, iridescent glow, like they were made of liquid light. She hesitated. There was no note, no instructions. Who had sent this? Why? Still, the pull was irresistible. She slid the glasses onto her face. The world didn't change at first. Everything looked sharper, the colors more vivid, but nothing extraordinary happened. Then she glanced at her reflection in the window and froze. There was something standing behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Heart pounding, she turned back to the window. The figure was still there, a tall, spindly shadow with elongated limbs and glowing, amber eyes. It didn't move, didn't blink. It just stared. She ripped the glasses off, her chest heaving. When she looked at the window again, the figure was gone. Okay, she whispered to herself, clutching the glasses in her hand. This is just some kind of prank. Or maybe I'm hallucinating. Stress. Definitely stress. But her curiosity wouldn't let her stop. What if the glasses were showing her something real? Something hidden? She put them back on. The figure was still there, but now it was closer. Too close. Mara staggered back, nearly tripping over a chair. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, and though it had no mouth, Mara heard a voice. "You see us now." "Us?" she echoed. It stepped aside, and suddenly the room was full of them. Dozens of shadowy figures, their amber eyes glowing like lanterns in the dark. They moved soundlessly, gliding around her as if she weren't even there. Mara's skin prickled. What do you want?" The first figure stepped closer again, its gaze piercing. "We do not want. We observe. We exist where you do not look." The words sent a chill down her spine. She yanked the glasses off and threw them onto the table, breathing hard. Without the lenses, the room was empty again, but she could still feel them. Mara tried to go about her day, tried to convince herself that the glasses were some elaborate hoax, but the feeling never left her. It was as if she were being watched, every second of every minute. By the second night, she couldn't take it anymore. She put the glasses back on. The figures were everywhere, not just in her house but outside, moving through the streets, hovering in doorways, lingering in the shadows of trees. They didn't interact with the world, they simply watched. "Why are you here?" she asked the first figure, who seemed to be their leader. It regarded her silently for a moment before responding. "To witness." "Witness what?" The room seemed to darken, the air growing heavier. "Your ending." Mara's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" The figure stepped closer, its form flickering like a dying flame. "Your kind built walls of perception, believing it would protect you. But perception is not truth. The walls are thinning, Mara Elwood. Soon, we will not be hidden." She staggered back, her mind racing. "Why me? Why show me this?" "Because you looked," it said simply. The figures began to fade, their amber eyes dimming until they were little more than whispers in the air. Mara tore the glasses off and hurled them across the room. They hit the wall and shattered into 1,000 shards of liquid light, each one evaporating before it could hit the ground. For a moment, she thought it was over. Then the whispers began. They weren't loud, not at first. Just faint murmurs in the back of her mind, like a half-remembered song. But over the following days, they grew louder, more insistent. She couldn't sleep, couldn't think. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them. Those amber eyes, staring at her from the edges of her vision. She tried to tell herself it wasn't real. But when she walked down the street, people turned to stare at her, their faces blank, their eyes glowing faintly amber. It wasn't just her. The world was changing. The shadows were coming into the light. Not a normal one, mind you, no X marking the spot, no neatly drawn compass rose in the corner. This was a map that didn't want to be found. It arrived in the mail, folded into a battered envelope with no return address, the edges worn and brittle like it had been passed from hand to hand for centuries. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but then I noticed the ink. It shimmered, not in the way cheap metallic ink does under light. No, this shimmer was alive, twisting and shifting as if it didn't belong to the paper at all, but had been borrowed from something far older and more restless. I should have thrown it out. Any sane person would have. But instead, I spread it out on my kitchen table and stared. The map wasn't of any place I recognized. No familiar landmarks, no borders or labels. Just jagged lines that might have been rivers, clusters of strange symbols, and paths that seemed to lead nowhere. In the center was a blank circle, surrounded by swirling marks that almost looked like writing, but didn't belong to any alphabet I'd ever seen. I was still studying it when my phone buzzed. It was Elise, my best friend, and a self-proclaimed skeptic of everything. "Hey," I said, holding the phone with one hand and the map with the other. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone sharp. "You've been ignoring me all week." "I've been distracted," I admitted, hesitating. Something weird showed up in my mail. "Oh God, please don't tell me it's another pyramid scheme." "No, it's different," I said, trying to find the words. "It's a map, but it's weird." Define weird. I didn't know how to explain it over the phone, so I invited her over. Elise, ever the pragmatist, arrived with a notebook, a magnifying glass, and the skeptical expression of someone who once debunked a haunted house by finding a leaky pipe. "Let's see it," she said, tossing her coat onto the couch. I spread the map out again, and the moment her eyes landed on it, her confident smirk faltered. She leaned closer, tracing the shimmering ink with her fingertip. "Where did you say this came from?" she asked. "I didn't," I said. "No return address. Just appeared." Elise didn't say anything for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and started taking pictures of the map. "You don't recognize this language, do you?" "No. Do you?" She shook her head. "But I've seen something like it before." That's how we ended up in her car at midnight, speeding toward a bookstore tucked in the back alleys of a part of town that seemed to exist only in half-remembered dreams. Elise called it a specialist shop, which was code for a place full of dusty books and conspiracy theorists. The owner, a wiry man named Harlan, didn't even blink when we showed him the map. He simply squinted at it, adjusted his glasses, and muttered something under his breath. "You found it," he said finally, his voice a mix of awe and dread. "Found what?" Elise asked, crossing her arms. "The cartographer's guide," Harlan replied, reverently. "The map of lost places." "Lost places?" I repeated, the phrase sitting heavy in the air. Harlan leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Every map shows you where to go, but this shows you where you shouldn't." Elise rolled her eyes. "Great. A map to nowhere. Very useful." But I couldn't shake the way Harlan's words settled in my chest, like they were reaching for something I didn't even know was there. He warned us to burn the map, to forget we'd ever seen it. Elise laughed. I didn't. We left the shop with more questions than answers, the map folded back into its envelope like a secret waiting to be told. I wanted to follow Harlan's advice. I really did. But that night, as the house settled into silence, I found myself unfolding the map again, my fingers tracing the glowing lines. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. A small symbol near the edge of the map, one that looked vaguely like an eye. It wasn't glowing like the rest of the ink. Instead, it pulsed faintly, like it was waiting for something. I pressed it. The map shifted. The shimmering ink began to flow like water, rearranging itself into new shapes and paths. The blank circle at the center filled with intricate patterns, and the swirling marks around it twisted into words I could suddenly understand. "It sees you now," the map whispered. I dropped it like it had burned me. The house went unnervingly still, the kind of silence that feels like someone holding their breath. Then, faintly, I heard it. A sound, soft and distant, like footsteps on gravel. Except they weren't coming from outside. They were coming from inside the walls. Panicked, I grabbed the map and shoved it back into the envelope, but the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, until they seemed to echo from every corner of the house. Daisy barked, her sharp, frantic warning bark, and then bolted for the bedroom. I didn't follow her. I couldn't move. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and the silence returned, heavy and oppressive. Slowly, I turned toward the living room. There was a figure standing there. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs unnaturally long and its face obscured by a veil of shifting shadow. In its hand, it held a map, my map, or maybe something far older. Its head tilted, as though it was studying me, and then it spoke. "You've seen too much," it said, its voice like the grinding of stone. I don't remember what happened after that. When I woke up, the map was gone, along with any trace that it had ever existed. Harlan's shop had vanished too, leaving behind an empty lot overgrown with weeds. But sometimes, late at night, I feel it, that heavy, watching presence. And I know the map didn't just disappear. It's waiting.